You are listening to The Brycen Show. Religion Occult Series is 003, Mystery Babylon, Episode 2, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. This is from Wikipedia. Ancient Egypt was an ancient civilization of northeastern Africa, concentrated along the lower reaches of the Nile River in what is now the modern country of Egypt. Egyptian civilization coalesced around 3150 BC, with the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh. The history of ancient Egypt occurred in a series of stable kingdoms separated by periods of relative instability known as intermediate periods: the Old Kingdom of the Early Bronze Age, the Middle Kingdom of the Middle Bronze Age, and the New Kingdom of the Late Bronze Age. Egypt reached the pinnacle of its power during the New Kingdom in the Ramesside period, after which it entered a period of slow decline. Egypt was invaded or conquered by a succession of foreign powers, such as the Libyans, Nubians, Assyria, Babylonia, Persian rule, and Greece. In the intermediate period of Egypt, periods of Egypt and late period in the aftermath of Alexander the Great's death, one of his generals, Ptolemy Soter, established himself as the new ruler of Egypt. This Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt until 30 BC, when it fell to the Roman Empire and became a Roman province. The success of ancient Egyptian civilization came partly from its ability to adapt to the conditions of the Nile River Valley. The predictable flooding and controlled irrigation of the fertile valley produced surplus crops, which fueled social development and culture. With resources to spare, the administration sponsored mineral exploitation of the valley and surrounding desert regions, the early development of an independent writing system, the organization of collective construction and agricultural projects, trade with surrounding regions, and a military intended to defeat foreign enemies and assert Egyptian dominance. Motivating and organizing these activities was a bureaucracy of elite scribes, religious leaders, and administrators, under the control of a pharaoh who ensured the cooperation and unity of the Egyptian people in the context of an elaborate system of religious beliefs. The many achievements of the ancient Egyptians include the quarrying, surveying, and construction techniques that facilitated the building of monumental pyramids, temples, and obelisks, a system of mathematics, a practical and effective system of medicine, irrigation systems and agricultural production techniques, the first known ships, Egyptian faience and glass technology, new forms of literature, and the earliest known peace treaty with the Hittites. Egypt left a lasting legacy. Its art and architecture were widely copied and its antiquities carried off to far corners of the world. Its monumental ruins have inspired the imaginations of travelers and writers for centuries. A newfound respect for antiquities and excavations in the early modern pyramid led to the scientific investigation of Egyptian civilization and a greater appreciation of its cultural legacy. And now we're going to get into the Osiris, Isis, and Horus stuff. From Wikipedia, the Osiris myth is the most elaborate and influential story in ancient Egyptian mythology. It concerns the murder of the god Osiris, a primeval king of Egypt, and its consequences. Osiris' murder, his brother Set, usurps his throne, while Osiris' wife Isis restores her husband's body and posthumously conceives a son by him. The remainder of the story focuses on Horus, the product of the union of Isis and Osiris, who is first a vulnerable child protected by his mother, and then becomes Set's rival for the throne. Their often violent conflict ends with Horus' triumph, which restores order to Egypt after Set's unrighteous reign and completes the process of Osiris' resurrection. The myth is integral to the Egyptian conceptions of kingship and succession, conflict between order and disorder, and especially death and the afterlife. It also expresses the essential character of each of the four deities at its center, and many elements of their worship in ancient Egyptian religion were derived from the myth. This is from a theology website, The Egyptian Myth, the Osirian Cycle. Now great Re had at last grown old. He saw that man had become fearful and angry. They had made the first weapons, and attacked anyone who might be an enemy of the sun god. Sadly, Re chose to leave the divine throne, and moved far away from the land. He moved where he could still see mankind, but be far out of their reach. He made the stars and scattered them along the belly of Nuit. He made the field of peace and the field of reeds as homes for the blessed dead. Finally he summoned wise Thoth. He spake to him and said, See, I will shine here in the heavens. I will light the sky above and the sky below. You must represent me on earth, and record the deeds of men. He then created the Ibis, form of Thoth, and made him the scribe of the gods. When Re was in the underworld, the world was engulfed in darkness, and men were afraid. They wept for the loss of the sun god. Their cries reached Re himself, and the Divine One also transformed Thoth into the great white baboon. Thoth shone with a silvery light, and man no longer feared the sinking of the sun. This was the mercy of Re to the children of his tears. Finally, Re commanded Geb and Nun to guard the world against the serpents of chaos. And he set his great-grandson Osiris, Lord of Eternity, as the new Pharaoh of Egypt, and made Isis his queen. Osiris proved to be a wise and kindly ruler. He taught man how to irrigate the land from the flood waters of the Nile, and to grow crops therefrom. He taught them how to know and worship the gods. He gave them the law of the land. He guided them away from cannibalism and incest, and brought civilization to the people. Soon the great Pharaoh had brought a golden age to Egypt. Golden age. And he set off to share his wisdom with distant countries as well. Isis was left in his place, and she ruled as well as Osiris himself had done. Her brother, Set, dark lord of storm, she watched as a mongoose eyes of the cobra. For Seth coveted the throne of Osiris for his own. When Osiris returned to Egypt, Seth had designed a plot for his overthrow with the aid of 72 conspirators. 72, number 72. A banquet had been planned in honor of Osiris, one that cunning Isis would not be attending. During the festivities, Seth began to speak of a splendid chest that had been made for him. He sent for the chest, and all present admired the fine wood and gilding. Seth declared that he would gift the chest to any man who could fit it exactly. Each man in his turn laid within the chest. Some were too short, and others too small. Seth knew that only Osiris would fit the chest exactly, for he had constructed it to Osiris' exact measurements. Osiris' turn came, and he lay trustingly back into the chest, fitting snugly within it. There was laughter among the guests who thought that Set had lost his prize to the Pharaoh. Set signaled his conspirators, and the chest was immediately slammed shut and locked. The chest was carried in the dark of night to a branch of the Nile, and was tossed into the cold water. Set then declared the death of the king, and crowned himself king of Egypt. And you can even tell just by listening to that part of the story that this same storyline has been used over and over again in fairy tales, movies, novels, whatever. The chest was carried in the dark of night to a branch of the Nile, and then was tossed into the cold water. Set declared the death of the king, and crowned himself king of Egypt. When Isis came to know of her husband's death, she became half mad with grief. She cut off a lock of her hair and dressed in widow's clothing. She then went out in search of her husband's body. During her travels, Isis came to learn that Osiris had known her sister Nephthys. From that union had been born a child, Anubis, but Nephthys had turned him away at birth. And so kindly Isis tracked him with the help of dogs, and raised him to be her guardian and attendant. From village to village she traveled, until finally she found that the chest had come to rest in the land of Byblos. It had been entangled in the roots of a young sapling. Strengthened by the murdered god, it had grown in a single night into a tall and graceful tree. When the king of Byblos heard of this marvel, he had sent for the tree to be made into a pillar for his palace. No one suspected that the tree contained a coffin within its trunk. Isis heard of this and made her way into the palace, residing there for many months. At last she convinced the queen of Byblos to give her the pillar, and she cut it open to reveal the coffin inside. She was given the best boat in Byblos, and she journeyed home to Egypt, finally hiding Osiris' body in the marshes by the Nile. One night, while mighty Isis slept, Set happened upon the dead king. In a fury, he tore the body of Osiris into 14 pieces, and scattered them through Egypt to ensure they would not all be found. When Isis found the empty coffin, her eyes reached to the heavens, even into the ears of her beloved Nephthys. She came to Isis' side, and the two sisters searched the land for the scattered body of Osiris. For many sad years the daughters of Nuit wandered through Egypt. Everywhere they found a fragment, they built a shrine. Everywhere they found a fragment, they built a shrine. At last all the pieces were gathered, with the exception of the god's phallus, or penis. Isis reassembled Osiris' body and fashioned a phallus of pure gold to replace the lost member. She wrapped the body in cloth and perfumed it with many scents. Thus Osiris was whole again, and mummification was created. Isis then transformed herself into the form of a swallow, and with her wings she fanned the breath of life into her husband. The Lord of Eternity rose, restored to life at last, but it was only to last for the length of one night, so that he and Isis could conceive their divine son Horus. Because of the loss of his phallus, or his creative energy, he could not return to the land of the living. Instead, Re-Adam made him the king of the dead in the realm of the beautiful West. From that time onwards, every Egyptian knew that death was nothing to fear, for his spirit could live on in the kingdom of Osiris. Even Horus could not have come into being had it not his half-brother Anubis sacrificed a day of his own life, so that Horus could be born. The young god lived a perilous childhood, yet survived to grow strong and proud. Soon he came of age and set out to fulfill his destiny, to pull the crown from his uncle Set, and avenge his father's death and claim his place as rightful heir to the throne. Then Horus went on to slay his uncle Set and avenge his father's death. And this reading is from The Secret History of the World by Mark Booth. It is a fertility myth about the yearly cycle of the seasons. The appearance of the star Sirius on the horizon, after months of being hidden, was a sign to the ancient Egyptians that Osiris would rise again shortly afterwards, and that the inundation of the Nile was due. Myths of the resurrected god-king were told all around the world, from Tammuz and Marduk to the Fisher King stories associated with Percival and the King Arthur cycle. They follow this same pattern. The king is fatally wounded, typically in the genitals, and while he lies suffering, the land stays barren. Then in the spring, a magical operation is performed, and he rises again, both sexually and in a way that fertilizes the whole world. This is why Osiris came to be worshipped in Egypt as a god of crops and summer fertility. The longed-for yearly appearance in the east of Orion, and his consort Isis, known to us as Sirius, the brightest star in the heavens, heralded the inundation of the Nile that revived the vegetable and so also the animal and human world. Literally a matter of life and death. The Egyptians made small mummies out of linen bags stuffed with corn dollies. When it was watered, the corn sprouted through the bag, showing that the great god was being reborn. I am the plant of life, says the Osiris of the pyramid text. And here, also from Wikipedia, Osiris is the mythological father of the god Horus, whose conception is described in the Osiris myth. The myth described Osiris as having been killed by his brother Set, who wanted Osiris' throne. Isis briefly brought Osiris back to life by use of a spell that she learned from her father. This spell gave her time to become pregnant by Osiris before he again died. Isis later gave birth to Horus. As such, since Horus was born after Osiris' resurrection, Horus became thought of as a representation of new beginnings and the vanquisher of the evil Set. As the sun was thought to spend the night in the underworld and subsequently be reincarnated, Ta-Seker Osiris was identified as both king of the underworld and god of reincarnation. From Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma, page 11. The sun is the ancient symbol of the life-giving and generative power of the deity. To the ancients, light was the cause of life, and God was the source from which all light flowed. The essence of light, the invisible fire, developed as flame manifested as light and splendor. The sun was his manifestation and visible image, and the Sabians worshipping the light gods seemed to worship the sun, in whom they saw the manifestation of the deity. The moon was the symbol of the passive capacity of nature to produce, the female, of which the life-giving power and energy was the male. It was the symbol of Isis, Astarte, Artemis, and Diana. The master of life was the supreme deity, above both and manifested through both. Zeus, the son of Saturn, became king of the gods. Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, became the master of life. Dionysus, or Bacchus, like Mithras, became the author of light and life and truth. And a lot of these names probably don't make, if you're not really familiar with mythology, probably don't really ring a bell, but I'll go into each of them at a later time in depth, just to add detail to the overall picture. Alright, our next reading will be from Manly P. Hall, Secret Teachings of All Ages. And that actually, before I get into that, you'll really start to notice the presence of the same stories over and over through this, and that's something to pay attention to. Okay. So, who are these deities? The sun deity, moon deity. We'll get into that with the Manly P. Hall, Secret Teachings of All Ages, page 134. The adoration of the sun was one of the earliest and most natural forms of religious expression. Complex modern theologies are merely involvements and amplifications of this simple aboriginal belief. The primitive mind, recognizing the beneficent power of the solar orb, adored it as the proxy of the supreme deity. Concerning the origin of sun worship, Albert Pike makes the following concise statement in his Morals and Dogma, which we just read from that earlier. To them, the aboriginal peoples, he, the sun god, was the innate fire of bodies, the fire of nature, author of life, heat, and ignition. He was to them the efficient cause of all generation, for without him there was no movement, no existence, no form. He was to them immense, indivisible, imperishable, and everywhere present. It was their need of light, and of his creative energy that was felt by all men, and nothing was more fearful to them than his absence. His beneficent influences caused his identification with the principle of good. The Brahma of the Hindus, Mithras of the Persians, Atum, Amun, or Amen, Phthah, and Osiris of the Egyptians, Bel of the Chaldeans, Adonai of the Phoenicians, Adonis and Apollo of the Greeks, became but personifications of the sun, the regenerating principle, image of that fecundity which perpetuates and rejuvenates the world's existence. Among all the nations of antiquity, altars, mounds, and temples were dedicated to the worship of the orb of day. The ruins of these sacred places yet remain. Notable among them the pyramids of Yucatan and Egypt, the snake mounds of the American Indians, the ziggurats of Babylon and Chaldea, the round towers of Ireland, and the massive rings of uncut stone in Britain and Normandy. The Tower of Babel, which according to the Scriptures was built so that man might reach up to God, was probably an astronomical observatory. Many early priests and prophets, both pagan and Christian, were versed in astronomy and astrology. Their writings are best understood when read in the light of these ancient sciences. With the growth of man's knowledge of the constitution and periodicity of the heavenly bodies, astronomical principles and terminology were introduced into his religious systems. The tutelary gods were given planetary thrones, the celestial bodies being named after the deities assigned to them. The fixed stars were divided into constellations, and through these constellations wandered the sun and its planets, the latter with their accompanying satellites. The sun, as supreme among the celestial bodies visible to the astronomers of antiquity, was assigned to the highest of the gods and became symbolic of the supreme authority of the Creator himself. Now, to break away for a minute, you'll notice just through symbology, history, every great ruler, every person of high religious authority will have solar symbology to describe their office, and it's everywhere when you really look at it. The king's crown is a solar symbol. The swastika is a solar symbol. The crown of thorns supposedly is a solar symbol. Even the marriage of Canaan was a solar story. Anyways, back to the book. From a deep philosophic consideration of the powers and principles of the sun has come the concept of the Trinity, as it is understood in the world today. The tenet of a triune divinity is not peculiar to Christian or Mosaic theology, but forms a conspicuous part of the dogma of the greatest religions of both ancient and modern times. The Persians, Hindus, Babylonians, and Egyptians had their trinities. In every instance, these represented the threefold form of one supreme intelligence. In modern Masonry, the deity is symbolized by an equilateral triangle, its three sides representing the primary manifestations of the Eternal One, who is himself represented as a tiny flame, called by the Hebrews Yod. Jacob Boehme, the Teutonic mystic, calls the Trinity the three witnesses, by means of which the invisible is made known to the visible, tangible universe. The origin of the Trinity is obvious to anyone who will observe the daily manifestations of the sun. This orb, being the symbol of all light, has three distinct phases: rising, midday, and setting. Setting, sunset. Funny that the person who killed the sun originally was named Set. The philosophers therefore divided the life of all things into three distinct parts: growth, maturity, and decay. Between the twilight of dawn and the twilight of evening is the high noon of resplendent glory. God the Father, the Creator of the world, is symbolized by the dawn. His color is blue because the sun rising in the morning is veiled in blue mist. God the Son, the illuminating one, sent to bear witness of his Father before all worlds, is the celestial globe at noonday, radiant and magnificent, the maned Lion of Judah, the golden-haired Savior of the world. Yellow is his color, and his power is without end. God the Holy Ghost is a sunset phase, when the orb of day, robed in flaming red, rests for a moment upon the horizon line, the Horus line, and then vanishes into the darkness of the night, to wander in the lower world and later rise again triumphant from the embrace of darkness. To the Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of immortality, for while it died each night, it rose again with each ensuing dawn. Not only has the sun this diurnal activity, but it also has its annual pilgrimage, during which time it passes successfully through the 12 celestial houses of the heavens, remaining in each for 30 days. Added to these, it has a third path of travel, which is called the precession of the equinoxes, in which it retrogrades around the zodiac through the 12 signs at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. 72. Number 72. Concerning the annual passage of the sun through the 12 houses of the heavens, Robert Hewitt Brown of the 32nd degree makes the following statement. The sun, as he pursued his way among these living creatures of the zodiac, was said, in allegorical language, either to assume the nature of or to triumph over the sign he entered. The sun thus became a bull in Taurus, and was worshipped as such by the Egyptians under the name of Apis, and by the Assyrians as Baal or Bol. In Leo the sun became a lion slayer, Hercules, and an archer in Sagittarius. In Pisces, the fishes, he was a fish, Dagon, Vishnu, the fish god of the Philistines and the Hindus. A careful analysis of the religious systems of pagandom uncovers much evidence of the fact that its priests served the solar energy and that their supreme deity was in every case this divine light personified. Godfrey Higgins, after 30 years of inquiry into the origin of religious beliefs, is of the opinion that all the gods of antiquity resolved themselves into the solar fire, sometimes itself as God, or sometimes an emblem, or Shekinah, of that higher principle, known by the name of the creative being or God. The Egyptian priests in many of their ceremonies wore the skins of lambs, which were symbols of the solar orb. Owing to the fact that the sun is exalted, dignified, and most fortunately placed in the constellation of Leo, which he rules and which was at one time the keystone of the celestial arch. Again, Hercules is the solar deity, for as this mighty hunter performed his 12 labors, so the sun, in traversing the 12 hours of the zodiacal band, performs during his pilgrimage 12 essential and benevolent labors for the human race, and for nature in general. Hercules, like the Egyptian priests, wore the skin of a lion for a girdle. Samson, the Hebrew hero, as his name implies, is also a solar deity. His fight with the Nubian lion, his battle with the Philistines, who represent the powers of darkness, and his memorable feat of carrying off the gates of Gaza, all refer to aspects of solar activity. Many of the ancient peoples had more than one solar deity. In fact, all of the gods and goddesses were supposed to partake, in part at least, of the sun's effulgence. The golden ornaments used by the priestcraft of the various world religions are again a subtle reference to that solar mythology, as are also the crowns of kings. Well, I guess I said that earlier. In ancient times, crowns had a number of points extending outward like the rays of the sun, but modern conventionalism has in many cases either removed the points or else bent them inward, gathered them together, and placed an orb or cross upon the point where they meet. Many of the ancient prophets, philosophers, and dignitaries carried a scepter, the upper end of which bore a representation of the solar globe, surrounded by emanating rays. All the kingdoms of earth were but copies of the kingdoms of heaven, and the kingdoms of heaven were best symbolized by the solar kingdom, in which the sun was the supreme ruler, the planets his privy council, and all nature the subjects of his empire. Many deities have been associated with the sun. The Greeks believed that Apollo, Bacchus, Dionysus, Sabazius, Hercules, Jason, Ulysses, Zeus, Uranus, and Vulcan partook of either the visible or invisible attributes of the sun. The Norwegians regarded Balder the Beautiful as a solar deity, and Odin is often connected with the celestial orb, especially because of his one eye. Among the Egyptians, Osiris, Re, Anubis, Hermes, and even the mysterious Ammon himself had points of resemblance with the solar disk. Isis was the mother of the sun, and even Typhon, the destroyer, was supposed to be a form of solar energy. The Egyptian sun myth finally centered around the person of a mysterious deity called Serapis. The two Central American deities, Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl, while often associated with the winds, were also undoubtedly solar gods. In Masonry, the sun has many symbols. One expression of the solar energy is Solomon, whose name, Sol, Om, On, is the name of the supreme light in 3 different languages. Hiram Abiff, of the Chaldees, is also a solar deity, and the story of his attack and murder by the ruffians, with its solar interpretation, which we'll read a little bit later, will be found in the chapter The Hiramic Legend, a striking example of the important part which the sun plays in the symbols and rituals of Freemasonry is given by George Oliver in his Dictionary of Symbolical Freemasonry. The sun rises in the east, and in the east is the place for the worshipful master. As the sun is the source of all light and warmth, so should the worshipful master enliven and warm the brethren to their work. Among the ancient Egyptians, the sun was the symbol of divine providence. The hierophants of the mysteries were adorned with many insignia emblematic of solar power. The sunbursts of gilt embroidery on the back of the vestments of the Catholic priesthood signify that the priest is also an emissary and representative of Sol Invictus. Anyways, something I actually forgot to mention. I believe I did. I actually can't remember. But the phallus of Osiris was eaten by 3 fish. And we'll find out later in the Mystery Babylon series. This is sort of important because it's one of those reoccurring themes. Go through a lot of these different mythologies. But yeah, the phallus was eaten by the 3 fish. And the 3 fish will become symbolic of the church, the state, and the mob, which we'll get into that later, but keep that in your head. The state, the church, and the mob. Alright, to go on. For regions, this is still from Manly P. Hall, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and if you can ever get a hold of this book, do it. It's extraordinarily enlightening. For reasons why they doubtless considered, and remind you that I don't necessarily believe all this, but this is the religion of Mystery Babylon. You could almost say this is the religious beliefs of the New World Order. And when you have a firm grasp of the religion, it brings so much together, and it really lends a hand to foretelling events, world events, reasons why certain things are becoming popular or being propagated. But anyways, to get back into it. Secret Teachings of All Ages. For reasons which they doubtless considered sufficient, those who chronicled the life and acts of Jesus found it advisable to metamorphose him into a solar deity. The historical Jesus was forgotten. Nearly all the salient incidences recorded in the 4 Gospels have their correlations in the movements, phases, or functions of the heavenly bodies. Among other allegories borrowed by Christianity from pagan antiquity is the story of the beautiful blue-eyed sun god with his golden hair falling upon his shoulders, robed from head to toe in spotless white and carrying in his arms the Lamb of God, symbolic of the vernal equinox. The vernal equinox. This handsome youth is a composite of Apollo, Osiris, Orpheus, Mithras, and Bacchus, for he has certain characteristics in common with each of these pagan deities. The philosophers of Greece and Egypt divided the life of the sun during the year into 4 parts. Therefore, they symbolized the solar man by 4 different figures. When he was born in the winter solstice, the sun god was symbolized as a dependent infant, who in some mysterious manner had managed to escape the powers of darkness, seeking to destroy him while he was still in the cradle of winter. The sun, being weak at this season of the year, had no golden rays or locks of hair, but the survival of the light through the darkness of winter was symbolized by 1 tiny hair, which alone adorned the head of the celestial child. As the birth of the sun took place in Capricorn, it was often represented as being suckled by a goat. At the vernal equinox, the sun had grown to be a beautiful youth. His golden hair hung in ringlets on his shoulders, and his light, as Schiller said, extended to all parts of infinity. Now we're getting into this solar deity stuff. Again, I'd say go back to the tarot, the show about the tarot, and you'll see a lot of these different ideas portrayed in the tarot cards. His golden hair hung in ringlets on his shoulders, and his light, as Schiller said, extended to all parts of infinity. At the summer solstice, the sun became a strong man, heavily bearded, who in the prime of maturity symbolize the fact that nature at this period of the year is strongest and most fecund. At the autumnal equinox, the sun was pictured as an aged man, shuffling along with a bended back and whited locks into the oblivion of winter darkness. Thus 12 months were assigned to the sun as the length of its life. During this period it circled the 12 signs of the zodiac in a magnificent triumphal march. When fall came, it entered, like Samson, into the house of Delilah, or the Virgin, where its rays were cut off and it lost its strength. In Masonry, the cruel winter months are symbolized by 3 murderers who sought to destroy the God of light and truth. The coming of the sun was hailed with joy. The time of his departure was viewed as a period to be set aside for sorrow and unhappiness. This glorious radiant orb of day, the true light, which lighteth every man who cometh into the world, the supreme benefactor, who raised all things from the dead, who fed the hungry multitudes, who stilled the tempest, who after dying rose again and restored all things to life. This supreme spirit of humanitarianism and philanthropy is known to Christendom as Christ, the Redeemer of worlds, the only begotten of the Father, the Word made flesh, and the hope of glory. The pagans set aside the 25th of December as the birthday of the solar man. They rejoiced, feasted, gathered in processions, and made offerings in the temples. The darkness of winter was over, and the glorious sun of light was returning to the northern hemisphere. With his last effort, the old sun god had torn down the house of the Philistines, and had cleared the way for the new sun who was born that day from the depths of the earth amidst the symbolic beasts of the lower world. Concerning the season of celebration, an anonymous master of arts of Balliol College in Oxford, in his scholarly treatise, Mankind, Their Origin and Destiny, says, "The Romans also had their solar festival, and their games of the circus, in honor of the birth of the god of day. It took place the 8th day before the kalends of January, that is, on December 25th. Servius, in his commentary on verse 720 of the 7th book of the Aeneid, in which Virgil speaks of the new sun, says that, properly speaking, the sun is new on the 8th of the kalends of January, that is, December 25th, in the time of Leo. Some of the fathers of the church said that what rendered the festival of Christmas venerable was less the birth of Jesus Christ than the return, as they expressed it, the new birth of the sun. It was on the same day that the birth of the invincible sun was celebrated at Rome, as can be seen in the Roman calendars published in the reign of Constantine and Julian. This epithet, Invictus, is the same as the Persians gave to the sun god, same god whom they worship by the name of Mithra, and whom they caused to be born in a grotto, just as he is represented as being born in a stable under the name of Christ by the Christians. Concerning the Catholic feast of the Assumption and its parallel in astronomy, the same author adds, "At the end of 8 months, when the sun god, having increased, traverses the 8th sign, he absorbs the celestial Virgin in his fiery course, and she disappears in the midst of the luminous rays and the glory of her sun." This phenomena, which takes place every year about the middle of August, gave rise to a festival which still exists, in which it is supposed that the Mother of Christ, laying aside her earthly life, is associated with the glory of her Son, and is placed at his side in the heavens. The Roman calendar of Columella marks the death or disappearance of Virgo at this period. The sun, he says, passes into the Virgin on the 13th day before the calends of September. This is where the Catholics place the feast of the Assumption, or the reunion of the Virgin to her Son. This feast was formerly called the Feast of the Passage of the Virgin, and in the Library of the Fathers we have an account of the passage of the Blessed Virgin. The ancient Greeks and Romans fixed the Assumption of Astrea, who is also this same Virgin, on that day. This Virgin Mother, giving birth to the Sun God, which Christianity has so faithfully preserved, is a reminder of the inscription concerning her Egyptian prototype, Isis, which appeared on the table of Sais. "The fruit which I have brought forth is the sun. While the Virgin was associated with the moon by the early pagans, there is no doubt that they also understood her position as a constellation in the heavens, for nearly all the peoples of antiquity credit her as being the mother of the sun, and they realized that although the moon could not occupy that position, the sign of Virgo could, and did, give birth to the sun out of her side on the 25th day of December. Albertus Magnus states, "We know that the sign of the celestial Virgin rose over the horizon at the moment at which we fix the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ." Among certain of the Arabian and Persian astronomers, the three stars forming the sword belt of Orion were called the Magi, who came to pay homage to the young sun god. The author of Mankind, Their Origin and Destiny contributes the following additional information. In Cancer, which had risen to the meridian at midnight, is the constellation of the stable and of the ass. The ancients called it Praesepe Jovis. In the north, the stars of the bear are seen, called by the Arabians Martha and Mary, and also the coffin of Lazarus. Thus, the esotericism of pagandom was embodied in Christianity, although its keys are lost. The Christian Church blindly follows ancient customs, and when asked for a reason, gives superficial and unsatisfactory explanations, either forgetting or ignoring the indisputable fact that each religion is based upon the secret doctrines of its predecessor. Alright. The solar orb, like the nature of man, was divided by the ancient sages into three separate bodies. According to the mystics, there are three suns in each system, analogous to the three centers of life in each individual constitution. These are called the three lights: the spiritual sun, the intellectual sun, and the material sun, now symbolized in Freemasonry by three candles. The spiritual sun manifests the power of God, the Father. The solar sun radiates the life of God, the Son, and the material sun is the vehicle of manifestation for God, the Holy Spirit. Man's nature was divided by the mystics into three distinct parts: spirit, soul, and body. His physical body was unfolded and vitalized by the material sun. His aspirational nature was illumined by the spiritual sun, and his intellectual nature was redeemed by the true light of grace, the solar sun. The alignment of these three globes in the heavens was one explanation offered for the peculiar fact that the orbits of the planets were not circular, but elliptical. The pagan priests always considered the solar system as a grand man, and drew their analogy of these three centers of activity from the three main centers of life in the human body: the brain, the heart, and the generative system. The Transfiguration of Jesus describes three tabernacles, the largest being in the center, and a smaller one on either side. And that's all I'm going to read on that part. Again, that was from Manly P. Hall, Secret Teachings of All Ages. Now we're going to read another chapter out of... Well, we'll go on to this. And I was telling you to pay attention to the stories because they're all very similar. Here we're going to hear the story of Hiram Abiff, which is a legend about a guy that Solomon used to help build his temple. And again, in this one, you'll start to see recurring themes of the solar deity. Yeah, let's get into it. The story of Hiram Abiff. And this is by William Harvey, JPFSA. I believe this guy's a Freemason. Boy, hopefully I can talk. Provincial Grand Master of Forfarshire, author of the Complete Manual of Freemasonry, the story of the Royal Ark, Robert Burns as a Freemason. The story of Hiram Abiff. The outstanding figure in modern Freemasonry is undoubtedly the widow's son, who is known to members of the fraternity under the somewhat obscure name of Hiram Abiff. He dominates craft masonry, and that in spite of the fact that neither the entered apprentice nor the fellow craft knows anything at all about him. And when they these weird titles and stuff, these are different degrees of Freemasonry. It is true that when the Master Mason recites what is called the first part of the traditional history to the fellow craft, who is on his way to the secrets of the third degree, he pays the fellow craft the compliment of saying, "As you are doubtless aware, Hiram was the principal architect at the building of King Solomon's temple. But if the fellow craft is so informed, he must have acquired the knowledge apart altogether from Freemasonry, as up to that particular moment no glimpse of the widow's son has been obtained in all the ceremonial of the first arid second degrees. From that point onwards, however, he is chief actor in the drama, and the legend of Hiram is the most characteristic part in the ritual of the order. Hiram, like many other notable men in the history of the world, was distinguished in the manner of his death, as that is set forth in the legend, and the dramatic circumstances attending the tragedy are what give amplitude to his biography. Beyond the time, place, and means of his murder, Freemasonry knows little about the man, nor, apart from Freemasonry, are many particulars to be gleaned. All that is known of him is contained in the volume of the Sacred Law, and even there is confusion. In one statement, that in the opinion of Brother Robert Frick, gold stamps the Masonic legend as a myth. According to the author of the second book of Chronicles, Chapter 2, Solomon sent messengers to Hiram, king of Tyre, to acquaint that friendly sovereign with the fact that he contemplated erecting a temple, and inviting him to furnish men and materials for the prosecution of the work. Solomon's first demand was for a specially gifted craftsman. "Send me now," he says, "a man cunning to work in gold, and in silver, and in brass, and in iron, and in purple, and crimson, and blue, and that can skill to grave with the cunning men that are with me in Judah and in Jerusalem." The king of Tyre received the embassy with cordiality and returned a favorable answer to Solomon. "I have sent a cunning man," he says, "endued with understanding, the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre." And this next reading is also the legend of Hiram Abiff, but it's from Freemasons-freemasonry.com/legend Hiram Abiff. 15 fellow crafts of that superior class appointed to preside over the rest, finding that the work was nearly completed and that they were not in possession of the secrets of the third degree, conspired to obtain them by any means, even to have recourse to violence. At that moment, however, of carrying their conspiracy into execution, 12 of the 15 recanted, but 3, of a more determined and atrocious character than the rest, persisted in their impious design, in the prosecution of which they planted themselves respectively at the east, north, and south entrances of the temple, whither our master had retired to pay his adoration to the Most High, as was his wonted custom at the hour of high 12. Now, this is kind of written weird, and it might be kind of hard to understand, but basically, these 3 ruffians or guys, which, remember, back to the 3 fishes, are going to try and kill Hiram Abiff so they can learn some sort of secret, I guess the secret word, the secrets of creation, whatever. So yeah, this is also mirroring the solar deity. After having finished his devotions, he attempted to return by the south entrance, where he was opposed by the first of those ruffians, who, for want of other weapon, had armed himself with a heavy plumb rule, and in a threatening manner demanded the secrets of a master mason, warning him that death would be the consequence of a refusal. Our master, true to his obligation, Hiram, answered that those secrets were known to but 3 in the world, and that without the consent and cooperation of the other 2 he neither could nor would divulge them, but intimated that he had no doubt patience and industry would, in due time, entitle the worthy mason to a participation of them, but that, for his own part, he would rather suffer death than betray the sacred trust reposed in him. This answer not proving satisfactory, the ruffian aimed a violent blow at the head of our master, but being startled at the firmness of his demeanor, it missed his forehead and only glanced on his right temple, but with such force as to cause him to reel and sink on his left knee. Recovering from the shock, he made for the north entrance, where he was accosted by the second of those ruffians, to whom he gave a similar answer with undiminished firmness, when the ruffian, who was armed with a level, struck him a violent blow on the left temple, which brought him to the ground on his right knee. Finding his retreat cut off at both these points, he staggered, faint and bleeding, to the east entrance, where the third ruffian was posted, who received a similar answer to his insolent demand. For even at this trying moment our master remained firm and unshaken, when the villain, who was armed with a heavy maul, struck him a violent blow on the forehead, which laid him lifeless at his feet. Alright, now we went done a lot of talking about the solar deity. Well, who is Isis, then, in this? So basically we have Osiris. He dies and goes to the underworld, and he is resurrected in the end as Horus, the sun god. Or the god of the sun, which, strangely enough, is two different things. So we'll get into Isis now. Alright. If I ever can get there. Isis is sometimes symbolized by the head of a cow. Occasionally the entire animal is her symbol. The first gods of the Scandinavians were licked out of blocks of ice by the mother cow, who symbolized the principle of natural nutriment and fecundity because of her milk. Occasionally Isis is represented as a bird. Remember, she was symbolized as a dove and a swallow in the previous story. She often carries in one hand the Kru Ansata, the symbol of eternal life, and in the other the flowered scepter, symbolic of her authority. Thoth Hermes Trismegistus, the founder of Egyptian learning, the wise man of the ancient world, gave to the priests and philosophers of antiquity the secrets which have been preserved to this day in myth and legend. These allegories and emblematic figures conceal the secret formula for spiritual, mental, moral, physical regeneration, commonly known as the mystic chemistry of the soul, which is basically the definition of alchemy. And when you begin studying alchemy, at some point in your quest, you'll figure out that you're really not talking about chemicals at all, but the chemistry of the human soul symbolized through chemistry. These sublime truths were communicated to the initiates of the mystery schools, but were concealed from the profane. The latter, unable to understand the abstract philosophical tenets, worshipped the concrete sculptured idols which were emblematic of these secret truths. The wisdom and secrecy of Egypt are epitomized in the Sphinx, which has preserved its secret from the seekers of 100 generations. The mysteries of Hermeticism, the great spiritual truths hidden from the world by the ignorance of the world, and the keys of the secret doctrines of the ancient philosophers, are all symbolized by the Virgin Isis. Veiled from head to foot, she reveals her wisdom only to the tried and initiated few who have earned the right to enter her sacred presence. Tear from the veiled figure of nature its shroud of obscurity, and stand face to face with the divine reality. And again, in the tarot cards, I believe it was the priestess who sat on the crescent moon and wore the veil, and only until at a later time would she reveal her secrets to the fool. The explanations, back to the secret teachings, the explanations in these pages of the symbols peculiar to the Virgin Isis are based on selections from a free translation of the fourth book of Bibliothèque de Philosophis Hermeticus, entitled The Hermetical Signification of the Symbols and Attributes of Isis, with interpolations by the compiler to amplify and clarify the text. The statues of Isis were decorated with the sun, moon, and stars, and many emblems pertaining to the earth, over which Isis was believed to rule. Several images of the goddess have been found upon which the marks of her dignity and position were still intact. According to the ancient philosophers, she personified universal nature, that mother of all production. The deity was generally represented as a partly nude woman, often pregnant, sometimes loosely covered with a garment either of green or black color, or of 4 different shades intermingled: black, white, yellow, and red. Apuleius describes her as follows. In the first place, then, her most copious and long hair, being gradually entorted and promiscuously scattered on her divine neck, were softly diffluous. A multiform crown, consisting of various flowers, bound the sublime summit of her head, and in the middle of the crown, just on her forehead, there was a smooth orb, resembling a mirror, or rather a white refulgent light, which indicated that she was the moon. Vipers rising up, after the manner of furrows, environed the crown on the right hand and on the left, and the cerulean ears of corn were also extended from above. Her garment was of many colors, and woven from the finest flax, and is at one time lucid with a white splendor, at another yellow from the flower of crocus, and at another flaming with a rosy redness. But that which most excessively dazzled my sight was a very black robe, fulgid with a dark splendor, and which, spreading around and passing under her right side and ascending to her left shoulder, there rose, protuberant, like the center of a shield, the dependent part of the robe, falling in many folds, and having small knots of fringe, gracefully flowing in its extremities. Glittering stars were dispersed through the embroidered border of the robe and through the whole of its surface, and the full moon, shining in the middle of the stars, breathed forth flaming fires. Nevertheless, a crown, wholly consisting of flowers and fruits of every kind, adhered with invisible connection to the border of that conspicuous robe, and all its undulating motions. What she carried in her hands also consisted of things of a very different nature, for her right hand, indeed, bore a brazen rattle, sistrum, through the narrow lamina of which, bent like a belt, certain rods passing, produced a sharp triple sound through the vibrating motion of her arm. An oblong vessel in the shape of a boat depended from her left hand, on the handle of which, in that part in which it was conspicuous, an asp raised its erect head and largely swelling neck, and shoes woven from the leaves of the Victorian palm tree covered her immortal feet. The green color alludes to the vegetation which covers the face of the earth, and therefore represents the robe of nature. The black represents death and corruption as being the way to a new life and generation. Except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. John 3:3. White, yellow, and red signify the principal colors of the alchemical, hermetical, universal medicine, after the blackness of its putrefaction is over. The ancients gave the name Isis to one of their occult medicines. Therefore the description here relates somewhat to chemistry. Her black drape also signifies that the moon, or the lunar humidity, the Sophic universal mercury, and the operating substance of nature in alchemical terminology, has no light of its own, but receives its light, its fire, and its vitalizing force from the sun. So with the Isis myth, it's pretty interesting because these really are old beliefs. And it's crazy to me that the people of these times, or the priesthood anyway, had a concept that the light, or that the moon did not give off its own light. It was lit up by a reflection of the sun. Other hieroglyphics seen in connection with Isis are no less curious than those already described, but it is impossible to enumerate all, for many symbols were used interchangeably by the Egyptian Hermetists. The goddess often wore upon her head a hat made of cypress branches to signify mourning for her dead husband, and also for the physical death which she caused every creature to undergo in order to receive a new life in posterity or a periodic resurrection. The head of Isis is sometimes ornamented with a crown of gold, or a garland of olive leaves, as conspicuous marks of her sovereignty as queen of the world and mistress of the entire universe. The crown of gold signifies also the honorific unctuosity or sulphurous fatness of the solar and vital fires which she dispenses to every individual by a continual circulation of the elements. This being symbolized by the musical rattle which she carries in her hand. This sistrum is also the Ionic symbol of purity. A serpent interwoven among the olive leaves on her head, devouring its own tail, denotes that the horrific unctuosity was soiled with the venom of terrestrial corruption, which surrounded it and must be mortified and purified by 7 planetary circulations or purifications called flying eagles. That's from alchemy. In order to make it medicinal for the restoration of health. Here, the emanations from the sun are recognized as a medicine for the healing of human ills. The 7 planetary circulations are represented by the circumambulations of the Masonic Lodge, by the marching of the Jewish priests 7 times around the walls of Jericho, and of the Mohammedan priests 7 times around the Kaaba at Mecca. From the crown of gold project 3 horns of plenty, signifying the abundance of the gifts of nature, proceeding from one root, having its origin in the heavens. In this figure, the pagan naturalists represent all the vital powers of the 3 kingdoms and families of sublunary nature, mineral, plant, and animal. At one of her ears was the moon, and at the other the sun, to indicate that these 2 were the agent and patient, or father and mother, principles of all natural objects, and that Isis, or nature, makes use of these 2 luminaries to communicate her powers to the whole empire of animals, vegetables, and minerals. On the back of her neck were the characters of the planets and the signs of the zodiac, which assisted the planets in their functions. This signified that the heavenly influences directed the destinies of the principles and sperms of all things, because they were the governors of all sublunary bodies, which they transformed into little worlds made in the image of the greater universe. Isis holds in her right hand a small sailing ship, with a spindle of a spinning wheel for its mast. From the top of the mast projects a water jug, its handle shaped like a serpent swelled with venom. This indicates that Isis steers the bark of life, full of troubles and miseries, on the stormy ocean of time. The spindle symbolizes the fact that it spins and cuts the thread of life. These emblems further signify that Isis abounds in humidity, by means of which she nourishes all natural bodies, preserving them from the heat of the sun by humidifying them with nutritious moisture from the atmosphere. Moisture supports vegetation, but this subtle humidity is always more or less infected by some venom proceeding from corruption or decay. It must be purified by being brought into contact with the invisible cleansing fire of nature. This fire digests, perfects, and revitalizes this substance in order that the humidity may become a universal medicine to heal and renew all the bodies in nature. The serpent throws off its skin annually, and is thereby renewed. This renewal of the earth takes place every spring, when the vivifying spirit of the sun returns to the countries of the northern hemisphere. The symbolic virgin carries in her left hand a sistrum and a symbol, or square frame of metal, which, when struck, gives the keynote of nature, F sharp. Sometimes also an olive branch, to indicate the harmony she preserves among natural things with her regenerating power. By the processes of death and corruption, she gives life to a number of creatures of diverse forms through periods of perpetual change. The symbol is made square instead of the usual triangle shape, in order to symbolize that all things are transmuted and regenerated according to the harmony of the four elements. Dr. Sigismund Backstrom believed that if a physician could establish harmony among the elements of earth, fire, air, and water, and unite them into a stone, the philosopher's stone, symbolized by the six-pointed star, or two interlaced triangles, he would possess the means of healing all disease. Dr. Backstrom further stated that there was no doubt in his mind that the universal, omnipresent fire of nature does all and is all in all. By attraction, repulsion, motion, heat, sublimation, evaporation, excitation, inspissation, coagulation, and fixation, the universal fire manipulates matter and manifests through creation. Any individual who can understand these principles and adapt them to the three departments of nature becomes a true philosopher. From the right breast of Isis protruded a bunch of grapes, and from the left an ear of corn or a sheaf of wheat golden in color. These indicate that nature is the source of nutrition for plant, animal, and human life, nourishing all things from herself. The golden color in the wheat indicates that in the sunlight or spiritual gold is concealed the first sperm of all life. On the girdle surrounding the upper part of the body of the statue appear a number of mysterious emblems. The girdle is joined together in front by 4 golden plates, placed in the form of a square. This signified that Isis, or nature, the first matter, was the essence of the four elements: life, light, heat, and force, which quintessence generated all things. Numerous stars are represented on this girdle, thereby indicating that their influence in darkness as well as the influence of the sun and light. Isis is the Virgin, immortalized in the constellation of Virgo, where the World Mother is placed with the serpent under her feet and a crown of stars on her head. In her arms she carries a sheaf of grain and sometimes the young sun god. We'll skip a little bit here. And again, this goes back to the tarot card. The World Virgin is sometimes shown standing between 2 great pillars, the Jachin and Boaz of Freemasonry, symbolizing the fact that nature attains productivity by means of polarity. As wisdom personified, Isis stands between the pillars of opposites, demonstrating that understanding is always found at the point of equilibrium, and that truth is often crucified between the 2 thieves of apparent contradiction. The truth is often crucified between the 2 thieves of apparent contradiction. The sheen of gold in her dark hair indicates that while she is lunar, her power is due to the sun's rays, from which she secures her ruddy complexion. As the moon is robed in the reflected light of the sun, so Isis, like the Virgin of Revelation, is clothed in the glory of solar luminosity. Apuleius states that while he was sleeping, he beheld the venerable goddess Isis rising out of the ocean. The ancients realized that the primary forms of life first came out of water, and modern science concurs in this view. H.G. Wells, in his Outline of History, describing primitive life on the earth, states, "But though the ocean and intertidal water already swarmed with life, the land above the high tide line was still, so far as we can guess, a stony wilderness without a trace of life." In the next chapter he adds, "Wherever the shoreline ran there was life, and that life went on in and by and with water as its home, its medium, and its fundamental necessity. The ancients believed that the universal sperm proceeded with warm vapor, humid but fiery. The veiled Isis, those very coverings, represent vapor, is symbolic of this humidity, which is the carrier or vehicle for the sperm life of the sun, represented by a child in her arms. Because the sun, moon, and stars, in setting, appear to sink into the sea, and also because the water receives their rays into itself, the sea was believed to be the breeding ground for the sperm of living things. The sperm is generated from the combination of the influences of the celestial bodies. Hence Isis is sometimes represented as pregnant. Frequently the statue of Isis was accompanied by the figure of a large black and white ox. The ox represents either Osiris as Taurus, the bull of the zodiac, or Apis, an animal sacred to Osiris because of its peculiar markings and colorings. Among the Egyptians, the bull was a beast of burden. Hence, the presence of the animal was a reminder of the labors patiently performed by nature that all creatures may have life and health. Harpocrates, the god of silence, holding his fingers to his mouth, often accompanies the statue of Isis. He warns all to keep the secrets of the wise from those unfit to know them. The Druids of Britain and Gaul had a deep knowledge concerning the mysteries of Isis and worshipped her under the symbol of the moon. Godfrey Higgins considered it a mistake to regard Isis as synonymous with the moon. The moon was chosen for Isis because of its dominion over water. The Druids considered the sun to be the father and the moon the mother of all things. By means of these symbols they worshipped universal nature. The figure of Isis is sometimes used to represent the occult and magical arts, such as necromancy, invocation, sorcery, and thaumaturgy. In one of the myths concerning her, Isis is said to have conjured the invincible god of eternities, Re, to tell her his secret and sacred name, which he did. This name is equivalent to the lost word of masonry. By means of this word, a magician can demand obedience from the invisible and superior deities. And later, in a later episode, we'll get into what this mystery word is. The priests of Isis became adepts in the use of the unforeseen forces of nature. They understood hypnotism, mesmerism, and similar practices long before the modern world dreamed of their existence. Now there's a connection to the show 001 of the paranormal series, where they were discovering hypnotism, mesmerism, and those kind of practices. Here, we're reading about them being practiced by, 2,000, 3,000-year-old civilizations. Even longer than that. Plutarch describes the requisites of a follower of Isis in this manner. For as 'tis not the length of the beard or the coarseness of the habit which makes a philosopher, so neither will those frequent shavings or the mere wearing of a linen vestment constitute a votary of Isis. But he alone is a true servant or follower of this goddess, who after he has heard and been made acquainted in a proper manner with the history of the actions of these gods, searches into the hidden truths which lie concealed under them, and examines the whole by the dictates of reason and philosophy. During the Middle Ages, the troubadours of Central Europe preserved in song the legends of this Egyptian goddess. They composed sonnets to the most beautiful woman in the world. Though few ever discovered her identity, she was Sophia, the virgin of wisdom, whom all the philosophers of the world have woed. Isis represents the mystery of motherhood, which the ancients recognized as the most apparent proof of nature's omniscient wisdom and God's overshadowing power. To the modern seeker, she is the epitome of the great unknown, and only those who unveil her will be able to solve the mysteries of life, death, generation, and regeneration. Let's see. I think that about covers it on the old Isis.